Joined here by the newly elected Denver District Attorney Beth McCann. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
For the sake of transparency, we should say that we are chatting on Monday. You will be sworn in on Tuesday, and people will be seeing this interview throughout the week. As you take a look at the DA's office since your election, what's the state of that office right now?
So the office runs well. The lawyers, by and large, are really excellent, passionate, diligent lawyers. I think overall the office is in good shape.
What's the single biggest change that needs to happen right away, though?
Well, one thing is kind of more administrative, but they haven't been doing performance reviews for the attorneys, so that's something that we'll be starting right away. And we will also be looking at some of the structural makeup of the office in terms of the units and whether they should stay the same. So those things kind of internal. And then I'm also very interested in the juvenile justice area and looking at how we can work more on diversion for juveniles, and I want to start a restorative justice program. I'm also very interested in mental health, substance abuse issues, seeing if we can make the criminal justice system work better. So those are sort of bigger picture items.
It's a long wish list.
Longer term. Oh, I have many more.
Let's take some of that apart. Performance reviews. Some people are going to hear performance reviews and they're going to think, oh, she's about to clean house.
No, not at all. I just think people need feedback. They haven't been getting feedback on how they can improve, what they think their strengths are, just fundamental issues like that. And also, I think it helps us understand who wants to be in which units. You know, it gives a chance for dialogue. No, there's no intention to clean house.
Juvenile justice.
Yes.
People hear that phrase, not a new phrase, something we've talked about before. But where is Denver missing the ball now that you want to work on?
So I mentioned restorative justice, for example. It's being used effectively in some other communities like Boulder and Longmont, particularly with young people, because the idea is you have the defendant taking responsibility, but having the victim interact in a facilitated situation so that a young person understands the impact of what they've done and the impact it has not just on the victim but the family and ramifications of that. And then there's a discussion about how to restore the harm. It's very successful in certain kinds of crimes. Obviously it's not appropriate in more violent, dangerous kinds of situations, but I'm excited about it because I've seen some positive results.
Is that something that a victim could opt out of?
Absolutely. It's totally voluntary, up to the victim and the defendant.
Are we done with the death penalty now in Denver?
We are under my administration. I'm not going to bring the death penalty.
What message do you hope that sends?
Well, couple. One, I don't think that the state should be in the business of killing people. And that's just sort of a value system that I have. You know, we punish people for killing people. And obviously, I think life in prison is a severe punishment. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is the amount of money and time and resources that go into these death penalty cases. It's overwhelming. And it doesn't just end in that one case, because if you do secure a death penalty verdict, you then spend up to 20 years, maybe even more, in appeals and in legal work. So I believe that a life without the possibility of parole, life in prison, it gets to the punishment piece, but it also doesn't cost the taxpayers those millions and millions of dollars that could be used to prosecute other cases.
What message do you think it sends to criminals?
You know, that's an interesting question. I think people who are committing the kinds of crimes that you would even think about a death penalty, that it isn't an impact for them. I mean, life in prison versus the death penalty, I don't think it's going to change the mindset of someone who is determined to commit a heinous crime.
Governor Hickenlooper said a few years ago that Colorado needed to have a conversation about the death penalty. I'm not certain that that conversation has actually happened. Some people have taken that to mean that if the death penalty is repealed in our state, it needs to happen at the ballot box, not through the legislature. Do you agree with that idea?
That's also a tough question. When I was in the legislature, I did vote. We had a bill to repeal the death penalty, and I voted to repeal the death penalty. But I also feel like it is something that the community should discuss and have a conversation about. In Denver, the polling that I've seen shows that the majority of Denver residents oppose the death penalty. And I'm representing the city and county of Denver.
So you would not have an issue with the legislature repealing the death penalty?
My preference would be that it be done at the ballot box, but as I said, I did vote to repeal it, so I would support that.
When you listed your priorities, you did not list repealing the death penalty in Colorado. Do I take it that you do not plan to be a vocal advocate on that as a statewide issue? You have other concerns?
I have more specific concerns with Denver. I've made the decision for Denver that we won't be using the death penalty, so I would like to focus on other issues that I think are more pressing. There's so few cases where the death penalty is ever even considered. It's a very tiny piece of the job.
Are there Denver police officers who are getting away with breaking the law while on duty?
I don't know that I can say that without actually looking at factual rendition of what happens. I know there's a perception that that occurs. I have seen some of the videos of actions that were taken, but I'm not in a position at this point to say yes or no. I think I need to really review a case in its entirety before I would make a decision like that.
Should beat cops be worried about District Attorney Beth McCann?
No, I'm fair. I am responsible. I will handle the case just as I would other cases and see whether or not there is evidence of law being broken. And if there is, I'll bring the case.
You're also a lot more attuned, though, to the concerns of the community that's critical of police than your predecessor, Mitch Morrissey.
Yes, I would say that's true.
But you don't think that that's something that should give DPD officers concern?
No, because the vast majority of DPD officers do a good job. They don't have excessive force complaints. And the Denver Police Department right now is doing a number of things to address this. They have, as you know, revising their use of force policy. We now have body cameras on all the patrol officers. And the chief has made this a priority. He's got a de-escalation training that's going on with officers. So
you're supportive of that new use of force protocol, encouraging them to stop, assess the situation. The chief thinks that that delay is not going to cost officers' lives and might save civilians' lives, just to bring people up to speed on that.
Yes, I am supportive. I think that in the more we can give officers tools so to de-escalate situations, the better off we're all going to be. And there's just a fantastic program that's gotten started in Denver called Co-Responder, where the Mental Health Center of Denver has 6 mental health workers who are assigned to the department, the police department, and they actually respond with officers when it appears to be a mental health hold. And the statistics, that's only been in effect for maybe 6 months. Statistics are really encouraging. Like out of, I think they made 700 or 800 stops. Out of that, only like, I think it's less than 100 or maybe less than 200 actually went into the criminal justice system. The others were diverted into the mental health system, and there's a follow-up with those folks. That is it's such an effective way to deal with these calls that officers get, which aren't really criminal calls. And so they're not trained to deal with it. It's kind of a waste of their time to, go on a mental health call when it can be handled with a mental health worker. Obviously, if it's a dangerous situation, the police officer is the one that takes over.
When you were in the state legislature, you championed a series of gun control measures.
Yes.
I'm curious whether you think that they are being effectively enforced and prosecuted, and whether you will more aggressively prosecute gun crimes as DA.
So a couple points on the legislation. One was the universal background check bill, which I was a prime sponsor of. That is definitely being enforced. CBI releases their statistics showing that just in, I think it was a couple years, over 800 gun sales were prevented.
Sure, that's administrative.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of in the administrative column. But where we get to the issues of discretion and prosecution, what do you think there?
Well, I'm very anxious to be aggressive in prosecuting gun violations. We have too many guns in our city. And one of the things that's very encouraging is this shot spotter program where officers are able to actually zero in on where guns are being used. And there's also a really exciting partnership with ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, in the federal system, where shell casings are being traced to guns. So even if they don't catch someone at the scene, if they get the shell casings, they can then put that into a national database, and they have been able to identify guns that are being used here in Denver. And that's, I think, a great development. So I think we will see more ability to actually identify and catch folks who own guns illegally.
So that's increased prosecution through technology. Will there be increased prosecution through discretion on your part?
Well, yes. I mean, that's part of what I will be doing, is making sure we are prosecuting illegal gun possession and illegal gun use.
And I want to clarify, you said earlier that it's your belief that there are too many guns in our city. Too many illegal guns, too many legal guns, or too many of both?
Really, too many illegal guns. I should have made that clear. I mean, these, we have so many homicides that are simply someone having a gun available, something that could be prevented. But along those lines, I also want to mention one of the other bills that I was prime sponsor of was to help keep the guns out of the hands of domestic violence offenders, because they may have their guns legally, but domestic violence is such a volatile situation. We had 11 domestic violence homicides last year. It was a record, I think, in the recent years. And that is an issue that I feel very strongly about, making sure that we keep our survivors of domestic violence as survivors and not victims.
You've been very generous with your time. I have two more questions. Do you believe that Colorado's Make My Day law is being correctly assessed and implemented in cases, or would you change the way that those considerations are given to Denver residents?
So I don't see any big change coming in that arena. I mean, I will follow the law. The law gives people in certain situations the right to use lethal force, and we will follow that.
And lastly, you've said that one of your priorities as district attorney will be to conduct a review of the DA's office to, quote, rid it of implicit bias.
Yes.
So if implicit bias, by its very definition, is subconscious,
yes,
how do you intend to root it out?
Interesting question. So we will be doing tracking in our office of race and gender and sexual orientation of cases, and comparing how we're treating people of different genders or different races. And we will, if we see a pattern, there will be education about that. There will be, we will be zeroing in and following those trends because they will stop. I'm also planning to have cultural competency training for everyone in the office so that we begin to understand how our own biases may impact our daily decision making. There's an excellent book by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, which I'm going to be encouraging my folks to read, so we can be aware of those influences and do everything that I can. I'll do everything I can to make sure that's not the basis of any decision about a criminal case.
And what do you say to folks who hear that and say they're going to run scared in the other direction? That they'll be so concerned of being accused of bias that they'll have a tendency to go easy?
You know, I don't really think that's going to be an issue. We'll be watching all of our dispositions, as Mitch did as well, and as you would do in the office. And if we see that kind of a pattern, we'll also be able to address it. But it's not treating people more gently, it's treating them consistently. So, you know, if you have someone with a similar record that's one race, and you have another person of a similar record of a different race, and they're charged with the same offense, they should be treated equally. So it's really, it's not we're going to go easy on people, it's we're going to be consistent.
Newly elected District Attorney from Denver, Beth McCann, congratulations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.